Now, Washington mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
7:37 on WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. Brian Wilson, Brian Neiman. You know, this weekend, NASA is going to try to pull off a pretty impressive feat. They're going to land a rover, not a little tiny rover. This is a 1-ton rover, nuclear powered. And they're going to do it in a very unusual way. We thought it'd be a good day to get Dr. Tom Jones on the line. He's a former NASA astronaut, the guy with the right stuff. He flew 4 space shuttle missions. He led 3 spacewalks and has actually lived or worked in space a total of 53 days. How cool is that?
Very cool.
I wish I could do that someday. Golly, that's cool. How are you, Tom?
Hey, good morning, Brian and Brian.
All right, so let's talk about this new rover. I mean, this is something new and different, but it sounds like to me that NASA is trying something new, different, and dangerous that could be a spectacular success or a giant new crater on the planet Mars.
Well, that's true. There's no guarantee that this is going to make it down. And as you know, a lot of Mars missions have gone a cropper trying to get down to the surface. NASA's got a pretty good record with its landers, though, and we've had some successes. I think the last 4 landers that we've tried, have made it successfully down. This one's different, though, because the rover, Curiosity, is so big that all the usual landing techniques that have been tried in the past won't work. And so they had to come up with this sky crane concept I'm sure you've read about, where the rocket sled actually lowers the rover on a tether to the ground, and once it's safely on the ground, it cuts loose and then flies away to crash. So it's all driven by the need to get this big 6-wheeled rover onto the ground safely.
Now, it's a 6-wheeled rover. It's about the size, it's often been said, of a Mini Cooper, so it's like a small car. But this is nuclear powered instead of solar powered. So this thing will, if it lands and is successful, will be operating for some time.
Yes, the radioactive isotope plutonium gives off decay heat, which gets converted to electricity, and it'll last at least 10 years, probably longer.
Wow.
So if all the mechanical systems work on Curiosity, it could be driving around for quite some time, and that gets us past the problems with dust settling on your solar panels that can cut your electricity supply, and this will be a more long-lived rover than Spirit, for example, which went dead a couple of years ago.
All right. So what is it actually going to do on Mars? What do they have to accomplish by this?
Of course, that's driving the whole process,
Yeah.
Brian. And this big rover carries a science lab on its back to do sophisticated analysis of the Martian soil and rocks. It's got 17 different cameras, and what it's really looking for is mineral evidence or geological evidence that the climate on Mars in this Gale crater was once benign enough to support microbes or primitive life. And it may not be able to find living life there today. It's not equipped for that, but it'll find organic compounds, which are the building blocks of life, and it is able to look for the geologic evidence of a nicer, warmer, wetter climate on Mars, which might have supported life in the past.
So it has all the technology aboard to determine what the material is, what the minerals are, if there are minerals, and then it beams it back to NASA? Is that how it works? How does it work?
That's right. The next step forward would be bringing actual rocks and soil back to Earth, but since we can't do that yet, we're not smart enough, they're taking the lab to Mars, and it'll give us a whole suite of analysis looking for, as I said, the organic carbon and hydrogen compounds that are the building blocks of life, and it'll also be able to look at the mineral makeup of the rocks that are there, and geologists can then tell what conditions those rocks were formed in. It looks like Gale Crater was once a lake, and that water and the water-bearing rocks that remain from that ancient wetter phase of Mars will be the target for the search.
All right, so this rover concept, we had real success with the little mini rovers that we sent to Mars, much, much smaller. And this rover concept is one that we've sort of invested in, although, you know, if this doesn't work, there's nothing else to follow on, is there?
Well, that's one of the problems I see, is that Curiosity is a one-of-a-kind rover, and even though it's the best rover to be sent to Mars, the most sophisticated machine we've ever tried to land there, there's no follow-up on NASA's budget plans. The current White House has cut back Mars and planetary exploration by 20% in its proposed budget. So if this one fails because of a fault in the technology or because of the harsh conditions on Mars, there's no way to replace it immediately. And we could see a long drought after this landing of Curiosity, and gosh, I hope it succeeds. But if it doesn't, there's going to be a long drought before we can have anything else up there like it again.
But we're sending rovers to Mars. The Chinese, I think, are getting ready to send some rovers to the moon, which is something that's new and different for the Chinese. But there's nobody out there sending people anywhere interesting.
Yeah, we're sort of in a human spaceflight holding pattern while NASA tries to develop a transportation system to the space station. And, that NASA's got the charter to go to the nearby asteroids and eventually to Mars by around 2040. But you have to put some investment in now to make that happen down the line. And I fear that we're neglecting the forward progress in our human spaceflight program, just focusing on the space station where we've been for the last 10 years or more, and neglecting deep space. And that's all driven by budgets. And, the president's budget has not been growing for NASA.
Talking with Dr. Tom Jones, former NASA astronaut, also author of the book Planetology. You said that there's no way we can get this stuff back. We're not quote, smart enough to get it back yet. How long will it take before we can, develop something that could get something back or some people back from Mars or the moon, for that matter?
Well, for Mars, the next big step is this Mars sample return, bringing rocks and soil back here for analysis on the ground. And that was the next mission planned for NASA, and it was in collaboration with the European Space Agency. But because of this 20% budget cutback I mentioned, NASA had to pull the plug on that. And so that next step is sort of indeterminate. The Europeans have now turned to Russia for help with their Mars rover that was going to be part of this sample return mission. And they won't be able to pull it off on their own either. So there's no answer to the question of when we're going to get Mars samples back. And as far as going to the moon, the Chinese are embarking on a lunar exploration program much like we did in the 60s. Their plan is to put this rover on the ground next year and then have people there sometime in the early 2020s. And, we did that a long time ago, and that's great, but if we can't do it today, they're still going to be ahead of us.
Yeah, I know we've been to the moon and back before with man, but, could this technology be easier to get to the moon and back? Could you do more missions, or we just don't really care about it anymore?
Well, to make it different than it has been in the past, either with Apollo or our lunar probes in the 60s and 70s, or to get to Mars in a more efficient way, we really need new technology. Chemical rockets have limitations. They make the trips very lengthy to Mars and back. So to get people there, you're going to need things like nuclear propulsion. You're going to need much more reliable life support systems than we have today. We're simply not smart enough with the technology to get there today. And it's going to be very expensive, so it's going to be an international effort when it really does happen. And my really real opinion about this is that we need to make money in space between the Earth and the Moon using the resources that are out there, and then that can pay for the expense of Mars missions in the future. Going there just on our own, just for science reasons, is probably not going to be the right path.
Well, Dr. Tom Jones, former NASA astronaut, you did 4 space shuttle missions, 3 spacewalks, and you've spent 53 days in space. You come back to Earth. You've written some great books, Skywalking, and the new book, Planetology. We thank you so much for joining us here.
You're welcome.
Always good to talk to you.
It's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it's not getting more play in the media. I just found out about it a couple of days ago, and I know you're big into science, and you brought it to my attention. I think it's fascinating that we're going to be able to do this.
Especially if you've seen the animation of how this sled hovers above the surface of Mars and literally lowers via cable this rover, and it cuts the cables, and this thing goes whoosh, shooting off, and then it eventually does, again, crash some distance away on the red planet.
Yeah. Knock on wood that it actually works.
Yeah.